hello and welcome to our very first episode of the Subtext Sesh. We are here this evening with our wonderful advisors, and we are going to talk about a topic that you're probably not going to learn in school or classes or anything like that. It's something that we're kind of confronted with here and there, and it's what is it really like to be a woman in the film and television industry? And Meredith, do you want to introduce our guests that we have?
Yeah, you may recognize a couple people here. We have Lidia Tamplenizza. She was one of our guests. And we have Diane, Cossa, and Tessa Munro here. Thank you so much for being here, you guys. Really appreciate
so much.
you taking your time out of your day, and hopefully we have an enjoyable conversation and we figure out some solutions to how we can navigate these issues.
Yeah, because it is a little bit different. I mean, speaking from my own experience, and I trust that everybody's kind of going to be doing the same thing. I do feel that we're going to be sharing very similar stories, but I think that, you know, it is a little bit different for women in the industry. So I guess my question is, what is it like being a woman in this industry?
Well, I'll jump in. You know, I didn't expect anything to be different, really, when I, started directing, because, I mean, I've been on sets where men have directed and they're treated like gold. They're the top gun. People can't do enough for them. They listen. Of course, there are always exceptions. So I just, and I'm pretty confident as a director. And it's different, though. It is different. Some of it's very subtle, and it builds up subliminally almost. And what happens, you start questioning your own ability, which is probably the worst thing that could happen. And so for young people out there, I would say it's not that. It's, especially if you've done your work, you've been hired, people know your work. So anyway, I just think it's different because people are used to seeing men in these positions. People are used to seeing men's faces. They're used to hearing their voices. They're used to their way, and it's just different. And anything that's different is tough. So yeah, that's what I think is different about it.
It's so deeply ingrained. People often don't even realize how deeply ingrained. There was one set I was on where the male director, what I had to contribute to the scene with the object that I had to give and so on, the director was asking me to do the exact opposite of what the scene meant. And so I was very gently trying to explain what I thought I was supposed to do, which was the opposite. And it was like, he barely looked at me like I'm a wall. The actor playing my husband then said exactly what I was trying to say, and everyone stopped and listened to him. And then the change was made. And I was like, thank you to him, because I was I was voiceless, in that moment. It was so frustrating.
And I feel like it's an interesting thing being a woman in the industry, because you have to navigate a fine line, and this is any industry, but it's like you have to be likable, but then you also have to be really good at what you do. So that's kind of like the line that you walk, because you were gently trying to say your opinion, and
I was being so polite, but they were so had wanted nothing to do with what I was saying, which was what was going to make the scene work. And then as soon as my co-star, who's a male, said something, oh, okay, that makes sense. Let's do it. Thanks.
Yeah. I work in a really technical craft side. I work in sound post-production. And, a lot of people are used to seeing men at the board and men leading the sound team, and, lots of men win Sound Academy Awards. There's been one or two women, but so it's interesting as I kind of progress in my career and get further and further up the ladder, just, I feel like this could be said in any job really, but I feel like I'm doubting my abilities when my counterparts may not, but they're confident anyway. So it's like a confidence thing as well. And I'm sure that's female kind of, and it goes beyond, it transcends kind of jobs. But I feel like sometimes I have to just believe in myself more than I think, and to get the job done. And it works, it's good. You just have to have the confidence. But yeah, it's hard just being in a very, very male dominated side of the industry sometimes, being, knowing how to navigate that.
Yeah, in my experience, I'm also in the post world too, very technical job day to day. And it's like 90% troubleshooting and maybe, 8% editing, 2% shooting my brains out. But no, I'm just joking. But yeah, it's if you don't know your stuff, then you're not going to be considered respected. And so I always go in there with the technical stuff and the jargon, and hopefully I'm received well. Yeah.
I also made an error of judgment based on the fact that there was a male who had, had a lot of experience, and, I think I made an assumption because he was male, you know what I mean? That he could do the job, and really I realized, wow, you didn't make the right assumption.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But it's great that you became aware of that too.
Yeah.
Regarding sound on set, in all of my years, I finally had a female sound person with the lav and in 2019 on the show SWAT. And I said something to her. She's like, I get that all the time, that I'm like the only one. And it was nice that it was female, because I was wearing a bathing suit and she had to put it in like right, all around my chest. So anyway,
that's a good thing.
Yeah, which is always great when you're an actor and you're like, you have some guy like sticking his hand in your, and
yeah, and I'm like, I can do it from here, thanks.
Yeah. And generally, like, all the sound guys that I've worked with have always been so gracious and so lovely, but you're still like, yeah, it's okay.
Depending on how you behave, I just find that I'm louder. I get louder because, and that's, unfortunately, women start being called too aggressive, a bitch, not always. Listen, this is a generalization, but I do find myself getting louder and saying things like, I'm the director, screaming, with an expletive between the director, like, and I don't talk like that really, but something else has to happen just to get there, to snap them out of it, like, yeah, there's a woman here, I'm doing my job.
Really unfortunate, like that you feel like you have to do that.
I know, I kind of always do. But what happens too is that, as we were talking about before, the subliminal stuff, sometimes they start getting small. And especially because you're treated in a certain way, sometimes the actors on the set just go with the flow and they are not necessarily respecting you as much as you would hope. And sorry, my dog is just about to come in and make a racket. But anyway, I had an experience where an actor, I gave this actor a note, and he said he didn't agree with it, which is fine. An actor could do that, and I like collaboration. But he then looked at the men in the room on the set to see what they thought about it. And another actor said, oh, don't worry, I'll tell you when to do this particular note. I was like, oh, I really did feel like I was shrinking at that point, which is, anyway, it's just one of the experiences.
I was on a Zoom with a female director in 2020, and she said she happens to have a first name that most people think is a male name. And she said that she felt her career had gone a lot farther because she'd gotten into rooms because of her name. And almost every time she walked in, the people were surprised and often said, oh, we thought you were a man. But since she was there, they actually heard her pitch on how her vision for that piece, and managed to win them over. But she wouldn't have even gotten into the pitch room had they realized.
Wow.
Yeah.
I heard you telling one time a story about, you know, the nudity thing. I'm curious to hear more about that.
From my story? Oh gosh, I mean, I started in the business as an actor, and I feel like every indie film when I was a new actor coming up and submitting to auditions and stuff like that, it seemed like everything that I would be up for required tasteful nudity. And I love that. I'm so glad that you laughed at that.
I've seen it so many times. It's like,
because, you know, and I'm completely on board with somebody's story, and you know, if it's important to the telling the story, then you know, I get it, and you know, it's somebody's personal choice. But like, it seemed like everything I submitted to, I would like get the audition, I'd get called back, and then they'd be like, so there's tasteful nudity, and I think I was just like, thank you very much. No, I had somebody liken their project to like Cold Mountain, like the nudity in Cold Mountain. And I was like, no, I don't, no, thank you. Just because I read the script and it wasn't Cold Mountain.
I'm sure you were thinking that. You probably didn't say that.
I was just like, this isn't Cold Mountain, but you know, I get where you're going and trying to convince me that it was going to be beautiful. And but it was, you know, and it was like, even in situations where I would get, you know, contacted, or I'd had lunches with like producers, like well-known television producers, and they're like, oh, you know, we're interested in learning more about you. And I was always like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I'm so excited. And then you find out like, they're like, so do you have a boyfriend, or so blah, blah, blah. And you're just like, you know, and you're just like, okay, like, thanks. I'm going to pay for my own lunch, and thanks for, you know, meeting me. It was nice to meet you. Yeah. It's just, you know, I'm not saying it doesn't happen to guys, because I'm sure that there are men in this industry as actors that are hit on, or that are asked to do things that, you know, are not okay. But I think that it was always not acceptable, but kind of acceptable for women to, you know, for someone to like talk to you over lunch and then, you know, kind of schmooze their way into a personal relationship. And this one producer in particular, he went through all of my headshots and told me how bad they were. I'm like, do you think I'm going to say yes now? But, you know, he explained to me that that's how he met a lot of his girlfriends. I was like, well, good for you.
The very first TV sitcom that I did in LA, I was playing a hooker in jail. Okay. First of all, which I just think is funny. But anyway, but one of the other women in my scene, she asked me, and I was like, what, 23 or something. But anyway, she asked me, she's like, so how did you get this role? And I said, oh, I auditioned for it through my agent. She's like, really? And I was like, yeah, why? How did you get this role? She's like, oh, I'm dating the producer. And I was like, oh, okay, so that does happen here. Because I was like, you know, I was like,
yeah, wait, that was me. No, I'm just kidding. No, it wasn't me.
I'd remember if it were you.
That would be so not hilarious, but no, that was not me.
And speaking to your point, Kate, too, I had an audition. I actually looked it up yesterday. This was February 2020. So this is after Me Too. This is right before the pandemic, in-person audition. And the role I knew, no nudity, but she had to be buxom. I get that. Fine. That was part of the bit, was the comedy, the difference between her and another character. So I went in looking as buxom as possible, and I felt like the scene went well. And the casting director was also one of the producers, and he had cast me in a different film, like only a couple months before too, which I had fun on. Anyway, and as I was walking out the door, he said to me, he had a pen, and he goes, oh, so what's your bra size? And I was completely taken aback, because I know that she's buxom, but you can see whether I am buxom enough or not. Like I came in full, like, and so, and he saw that I stopped, and then he was like, oh, well, I'm asking everyone this because we need to know how much we would need to try to, how much help people would need if they get the role. And I'm like, what? Like, it makes like no sense, because it's not like if the role had been a man and it had been described as he's well endowed and walks like that, and you walked in and you had a sock in there as a man, he wouldn't be like, oh, so is that stuffed with a sock or not? You know what I mean? Like, and I have no problem. Once you get the role, I have no problem. Of course, I'm going to give a wardrobe my exact sizes. And of course, that's no problem. But it made it obviously feel like whether I got the role or not was contingent upon my actual bra size as to how much I, like, anyway, it was
like out the door as you're leaving too.
Yeah. It, literally, I was
tasteful.
like, my back was too, and I was like, I was so taken aback and I was so irritated by it. And what was funny was with this particular person, he didn't come off as lascivious. He came off as clueless and still sexist without realizing it, like,
Yeah.
and I told my manager, and I was like, just letting you know, the end did not go well. I'm sure he didn't like me after I was like, and I didn't end up giving him my bra size because I didn't feel comfortable in that moment. I didn't feel like it was relevant. I either look the part or I don't. I'm like, at this point, I'm in the room already.
So Tessa, how did you navigate that? Because I think that
That's
really
the thing.
important.
I didn't say enough. I was so shocked. Like everything had been, standard for an audition before then. So, and normal and professional up till that point. So I did say, I don't feel comfortable giving that information out at this point. But I didn't say, I wish I'd said, I'm happy to give that to wardrobe if I book the role, or, but I couldn't even get that much out. And he was just like, oh, okay, well, you don't have to give it. But he was very like, what's her problem? And I'm like, my problem is you.
But it's also like, I mean, anytime there's a situation that's kind of like questionable, I always put it into like an office place. And I'm like, what would happen? And granted, it is a little bit different because you would have to, talk to wardrobe and deal with that. But like,
of course, which I'm happy to do.
I don't know, like that's kind of the litmus test for me. I'm like, would this be okay if it was at a bank, or would this be okay if it was at like a university? And the answer is usually no.
It was just,
if it makes you feel uncomfortable, you have to gut check yourself, because it does happen. Like sometimes I feel gaslit, like I'm, oh, you're overreacting. That's classic. And I have to take a step back and go, wait, no, if it feels wrong, it must be wrong, right? I mean, yeah, and I think that's important for our listeners too. Like, if something feels wrong to you, it probably is. So, step back from that situation.
well said.
Yeah.
When I was in my early 20s, I met with a manager, and I could tell what his interest was in me. And I was glad that even though I really wanted representation and didn't have it yet, and he offered me representation, that I said, no, thank you, because that's hard to do, especially when you haven't had a rep, and because it didn't feel right. That being said, the rep I did get made me uncomfortable for 10 years. So not to the same extent as that manager I had turned down. It was more subtle, but still not appropriate. And I put up with it because he got me good auditions. You know what I'm saying? It was like, oh, so I mean, you keep learning, and you speaking out like this helps people be more aware. And
it's not like the insensitivity of it. It's like, it's just the culture. I mean, it's just, they're not thinking.
So I want to kind of dive in, because I feel like we've presented a couple different, like a nice range of like really obvious things, like someone asking your bra size, or someone asking you out, or whatever. And then like more subtle things. And I think it's important to talk, like, because the really obvious things, you're going to just, generally speaking, you're going to say, I'm not comfortable with this, and you'll be able to kind of figure that out right away. I kind of want to dive into the things that are a lot more subtle, and that you may not be aware of are happening, but they're happening. And I'm happy to kind of explain that a little bit more, but I think I see heads nodding. So I think some people may have experiences on that front that we can talk about.
You know, there's so many, and it's true, you don't really realize it while they're happening. And this may seem like it's more than just a subtle thing, but you know, you go to lunch, and you know, everybody is hungry, and the crew, and well, it takes either the AD or somebody to say, you know, and I always say, oh no, it's okay, but the director always gets fed first. I mean, that's just the way it is on a set. Like, I've been on so many sets with TV. The director, the producer, the writer, only because they've got to usually do a meeting right away. It's not because, you know, and that, you know, I just felt like that didn't happen. And I don't know if it's because I was a woman, but there are those little things you're like, that's interesting. Nobody said anything, and I'm not going to push my way through, you know. I don't know. That's just one thing that came to my mind right now.
I have one. Recent. I will not mention any production companies, but we were doing a meeting for a show that I was sound supervising, and you know, it's me, the female sound supervisor, and my whole crew is male, director's male, you know, and we're having this meeting with the production company, and the director, who was a lovely man, introduces all the sound people. He's like, oh, this is so-and-so, the mixer. This is so-and-so, the mixer. This is Lidia, the sound editor. And, you know, it didn't seem that big then. And maybe, you know, I have a chip on my shoulder about it, but I was like, oh man, it's like, I'm their boss. And he kind of made me out to be just like, I don't know, not the boss. And I was like, oh, that didn't feel great. But it wasn't on purpose, but it was just kind of a thing. And it made me kind of go, oh, it's probably just used to saying that, you know? So that was kind of just a little thing but it did bug me.
I think that's the hard thing. And that's where awareness kind of comes into play, because I think conversations like this, and the more we can, like, all women can talk about this, and the more women that are in charge, you know, can just raise awareness of how to treat people. I don't know.
Yeah. Like, would you have retaliated in a very sly, you know, way where it's like, hi everybody, I'm actually the supervising sound editor, I love my team that I work with, thank you so much for that introduction, like, you know, like, kind of give it to them, but not really, like, it's hard to be passive aggressive, and I don't know,
I like, that's not me. And I feel like I actually have thought a lot about this, like just becoming a supervising sound editor, and what that, you know, and the fact that maybe my crews will be male, and how that sits with me, how that will sit with them. And I thought to myself, I think my MO is just to be true to myself. And, you know, people are always going to make those mistakes, but I just have to rise above it. And I actually, to your point, Kate, about minimizing yourself, I thought, you know, maybe there's some of that, you know, there's this subtle minimizing that I do, and that's kind of interpreted. So yeah, it's interesting. Like, I'm 45 almost, and I'm just learning these things. It's a journey.
I mean, I feel like that's how we've been raised, though. And it's not, I'm not like bashing parents or generations or anything like that, but you know, I know that if there was ever like a woman that was being very outspoken, you know, it landed a certain way, and it's like, oh, well, she's being pushy, and you know, she shouldn't be so pushy. And like, it's just, it's okay to be pushy. And if it were a guy, they wouldn't be pushy, they'd be assertive, you know? So I think for a lot of us, it's just unlearning a lot of things that we were raised with. You know, it's okay not to be liked. It's, you know, I mean, you should want to be liked, but if you're really good at your job and you have to kind of lay down the law, then I think that's okay sometimes if you have to. I don't know. I was going to ask, I don't know what I was going to ask actually. Do you think it's, you know, do you think it's something that is like an awareness like across the industry, or do you think it's I don't know. I don't know what I'm asking.
I feel like the awareness is growing,
Mm-hmm.
but slower than some people realize. Like people asking your bra size as you walk out the door of an audition. Yeah. But I mean, in 2020, I looked this up. Out of the 100 top grossing films, only 29% had a female protagonist. Like,
yeah.
You know? That's in Variety. That was in Variety, by the way. But, and so we're still not getting in as many doors as we should be. Yes, there has been some progress for sure, but there's still not nearly as many female directors, nearly as many female #1 leads, you know, whether it's TV or film. And
I hope it's changing. I mean, it feels like it is a little bit.
It is,
especially with the diversity and inclusion writers. Like I am seeing it definitely in my field. Like there's a lot more women. There's a lot more people, you know, of different colors, ethnicities, you know, genders, which is great, because it makes you feel like you're not alone, really. But also the young people that have come up, I feel like I'm kind of in awe of some of the young people's sense of self. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but maybe there's also a generational thing that maybe people in our generation have had to fight a little bit harder to get seen, to get our foot through the door. And now we're trying to make space, and these young people are coming in and they feel like they do belong. And it's so amazing to watch.
I feel like, you know, I was going to say the pendulum always goes, you know, just when women fighting for their equal rights, right? And sometimes there is all this anger, and it sounds like male bashing. Like I was listening to some thinking, if there are men listening, be like, wait, you're saying all the men are like that? And it is about unawareness. It's about, I had a thing where I was interviewing a sound person. We were all on the phone, and the men kept like speaking over me. And and afterwards, you know, after I was really upset about it, they called me and said, you know what, we're not used to having a female director, and I apologize for that. I mean, that was great. Good. As the film went on, there were other instances, but I you know, I really did start to feel like I don't want to go into a set on a set the next time, assuming that it's going to be like that, with a chip on my shoulder, being defensive. And that's some advice I would give to young people. To go in with that attitude, forget it. It's just going to be a horrible experience. But, you know, a really wise woman said this to me once, like, you can say anything to anybody, but just change the music. Just how you say it. Of course, if they're complete assholes and you're angry, you can say, you know, be angry. But I don't think, you know, a lot of times it's just not what they're used to. They're not used to having women. It's not that they're misogynists necessarily. Some are, you know, some for sure. And if it's a really obvious thing, you know, like they're grabbing your ass or whatever. But I think otherwise it is, as I said, subliminal, and you just have to make people aware of what's going on. Say, look, I'm feeling this way, you know, I'm feeling like you're treating me differently. And what happens with that, you know? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's really important to say that it is not about, bashing guys or bashing men, and because there are so many wonderful, aware, supportive men in this business. I think it's, the point of this conversation is really to just highlight the things that sometimes go awry, and to encourage women to know that it's not okay, and to kind of say, okay, you're not alone, and this is how we've navigated it, and this is, later on in the conversation we're going to kind of talk and brainstorm about like how to change it. So I feel like, you're 100% correct. Like, we don't go into situations just looking for someone to say, I'm going to treat you differently because you're a woman. I think it's just, I think everybody on this call has had that happen. And it's, something happened to me. I was directing a film, and the DP that I was working with wouldn't talk to me. And we were at a meeting, and, he was talking to all of my colleagues, all men. And I was just like, and I had this like pit in my stomach. I'm like, what is it? Like, am I not good enough? Like, what is going on? And I sat with it. I talked to my colleagues. I'm like, did you notice this? Is it me? Am I just being like so self-involved? And my colleagues noticed it, and it was a thing. And I fired him. Because it was not okay. And, we found somebody else, but
May I ask, did you tell him why?
Yes.
Did you tell him about it? Oh,
absolutely. I said, I feel like this is what the situation is. Unfortunately, we don't have the time or the resources to manage this while we're filming. So, I'm very sorry, blah, blah, blah. And I will say that he responded with, I'm sorry you felt that way, or I'm sorry you saw it that way. So unfortunately, I don't think he really learned the lesson, but I'm sure he's a very nice person and has lots of lessons to learn.
Yeah. No, I mean, this industry is, I've been self-employed since 2014. A lot of people do this by gig by gig. And we don't have a culture set up in the industry as a whole that maybe a huge marketing agency would have, where they have sexual harassment presentations, and they have 3-hour classes that they have, and they have to do it every quarter, and things like that. We just don't, it doesn't exist for this industry. And because it's such a gig culture, you really have to look out for yourself, because nobody else is advocating for you. In my experience, one of the first jobs I had was at a post house in New York, and my boss was just the most incredible person ever. He really had my best interests at heart. When it came time to, ask for pay, because I was initially an intern, we had the conversations, and it went in circles because I didn't know necessarily how to speak directly to what I wanted. And so nothing really happened until I might have threatened to leave. And so it's just, it's interesting, because males tend to ask for more and receive more. And women, I think I read, what is it, on the frequency with which women ask for lower salaries than men is declining, which is great, but it's still like, it's crazy, like the gap. So you just have to be very assertive in the most charming way, and just try and navigate that. Like, have your goal, have a second goal in mind if they don't meet that first goal. Those are just some of the things that I dealt with when I was first starting out.
Know your worth.
Know your worth.
Yeah.
And it's okay not to be charming.
It's also okay not to be charming. Exactly.
I'm really embracing
it. Was a joke.
It's okay not to give out your bra size. I didn't get the role, not surprisingly. But
I think
okay.
Also when we're talking about pay and things, like, I mean, like, it's okay to take a pay cut sometimes. Like we're not saying, go in there and ask for what you're worth, like, and say you've got the experience. No, you know, there are degrees here. Like, you know, if there's someone you really want to work with and they've only got this much money, like, it's a case by case basis, but just, yeah, don't undercut yourself. That's the
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important, and rate is something that we talk about on our podcast every single episode, because Meredith and I think it's so important because, you know, the more you practice talking about it and the more you think about, you know, jobs and why you would take it or why you might not take it, and, you know, the pros and the cons to, you know, it's not like traditional jobs where you're going to make X amount of dollars and then your salary is going to increase and increase and increase. It's very different. So, but I think you're right. I think, you know, you judge case by case, Lydia, but you also, you know, you have to go in there and be confident with what you're asking for and know that you're worth it.
and it's okay to say no.
Mhm.
Yes.
I think that's a big one too. Like, I don't know if it's like innate in women that we this is a horrible way of saying it, but are people pleasers more than, you know, than the other sexes. But I find sometimes that hinders my better judgment, or it has in the past, and I'm working on that. I think I'm working on being less of a people pleaser and more of a Lydia pleaser.
I'm a giver too. And you have to, like, speaking with other male editors that I've worked with, like, they have harder lines than I do. Like, they're like, it's 8 o'clock. I'm not going to send out that AAF right now. Like,
right.
I'm not doing that until the morning. So,
yeah.
I think there's a question someone is asking us.
Yeah, I just saw that. Catherine wants to know, is the situation better, worse, or the same in the business?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, you know, it really, in some ways it is. I mean, and then you hear about 2 stars of a film and the woman is getting paid less than the male star. Both stars, equal roles. And so in that way, it's not getting better. I mean, women are starting to demand that they get equal pay. And I think that the subliminal thing, it's the mindset. It's I don't know how one changes that except to be talking like we're talking, making people aware that it's just, I mean, it's a little extreme to say it's in the DNA, but it almost is. It feels like it's on a cellular level that people just respond differently to you as a woman in a role that, I mean, there aren't that many female directors, you know, and the ones that there are, I mean, how many have won any kind of awards? And when they really deserved it. So yeah, Celeste, I love Celeste. Anyway, she's my friend. You know, I think that it's hard not to get a little bitter about that stuff, you know. But it is getting. I mean, I think the Directors Guild, for example, is like making a point of, you know, hire women, and so women are getting a chance to learn the craft, because very often they're not up to where a lot of the men are because they haven't had the same opportunities, you know, as the men have.
I do feel overall it's getting better. Yes, sometimes we take 2 steps forward and a little step back for sure, but I do think in general it's better. Gina Davis Institute for Women in Film in Media, or Women in Media, is really helpful. I love what she's been doing, and for example, I want to shout out to a director I worked with in 2019, Alex Neuer. He had 2 female leads already, and then a detective role that was written. He wrote it as a male, and then you realize he thought to himself, well, why can't I change this into a female? I want more females to have more roles. And he made a point. So, and I ended up getting that role. So thank you. but we had talked about it. He's like, I want to advocate for more female leads and more roles for women. So I decided to write them, and that more people need to do that, including men. So thank you, Alex. It was fun working with him.
I feel like it's a little bit better in my industry also. Like, I think 2 I've been hired based on my gender for two positions, because I think female showrunners and female-centric stories, they're searching for female crew department heads. And
But Lydia, can I say it was your gender and how your credit and how and also your ability?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But I was talking to a friend of mine. I said, what sucks a little bit is that because of these diversity hires, that's the only reason I'm getting looked at for some things. But if you prove yourself, then they're going to hire you again, hopefully. So it sucks that it's because suddenly it's a thing that I'm getting looked at, but it's also helping, and this is why we should have diversity and inclusion writers, because otherwise we're just going to see the same old people in the same old roles, and that's not what the world looks like. So
I was struck when I saw the Wonder Woman with Gal Gadot, the original Wonder Woman, in the theater, a few years ago. I was with 4 of my close female friends. There's a group of us, and we were all just crying in the movie theater. And we didn't realize, or I'll speak for myself, but I know they felt the same way, how I didn't know how much I needed to see an entire screen filled with strong women.
yeah,
It was so I was overwhelmed, and I didn't know how much I had missed that, not having that, because it's always been lots of men and maybe one woman, maybe, you know what I mean? Maybe, and I wanted to be up there with them, and it's anyway, we don't always realize what we're missing until we actually see it or have it.
Yeah, it seems that there are a lot more stories being told about women. And I think that's encouraging. I will say that it is improving. Meredith and I were going over the celluloid ceiling report that just came out for the top grossing US films of 2021. It's gotten better. Apparently 2020 was the year where it got a lot better, but it took a pandemic to give women a chance, I'm just kidding. But it seemed to have gotten a little bit, we've gotten bumped back a little bit, but there are certain positions, that they're just abysmal numbers, like film scores, composers for films. I think it's something like 7% are women. 7%.
That's brutal.
really
Yeah, that's
hard to get
2021.
the
Yeah.
door.
I
feel
just-
like sometimes it's a training thing too. Like, what, I don't know, like so and so's nephew gets to, like it's hard to get in the door. And maybe it's also because we doubt ourselves sometimes, and we're not pushy, and we're not, maybe that's why we're not there. We're not there in the numbers. I'm not sure. I mean, does anyone have any insight into that? Because
I also think that, as I said before, women don't choose, have not in the past chosen jobs that, usually men get. And they also have experience, when on the set, like Law and Order, for example, Special Victims Unit, they started trying to get some women, and the men, first of all, everybody was really hard on the women. They were really hard. And the men, usually the first one you do is not always the best episode, right? But you get more leeway. And with the women, it was like, she's not good enough. But I also think sometimes it was true that she wasn't. And I think it's because she didn't have the experience, she didn't have the opportunity, and she didn't have the training. I don't know. I mean, there is something to be said about that too, you know, about why there aren't as many female directors as men.
You know, it was interesting that Meredith and I were talking with a film student recently, and she was telling us that she's the only film minor, because I think it's a minor. She's the only female in the program right now in her year. And she was finding it difficult because the guys would group together and be like, oh, you know, we'll work on this and this, you'll do this and you'll do this. And she felt like she was being excluded.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something that really resonated with me on that, just like smaller microcosm of the industry, because I feel like it's very telling. You know, it's like all this group of guys gets together and they're like, oh, well, you know, you'll do this, you'll do this, you'll do this. And then there's the one female that's still in the same program and just kind of excluded. I don't know, Meredith, did you feel the same way? Because it just struck me as being interesting.
Yeah, in my experience, it's I'm very happy to say this, that I've felt very included and treated very well. I grew up with 3 older brothers, so I feel like that has something to do with it, probably a little bit. But no, you can't push it onto that. But for whatever reason, the people that took me under their wing were extremely generous. I'm gonna have to think about it while we continue to talk.
So I think that this is like a natural place to talk about the part of this whole conversation that I think I'm most excited about. Like, what do we do? How do we take all of this? Because I didn't want this to be just a complaining session, because I don't think anything will ever change if people just get together, talk about their stories, and then, okay, good night. Like, what do we do about this? How do we fix it? How do we do something tomorrow about it? Because I think that's how we're going to change things.
If we're in a position to hire more women.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, support people if you're in a position where you can hire, or if you can support people in maybe positions a bit lower than you, that's the way to do it.
I'm going to just jump in. So like, maybe we can break it down for our listeners in different career stages. So like entry level, mid-level, and then like senior level, or high, like, I don't want to say high level, but like senior level kind of thing. So maybe we can brainstorm a little bit in that way. So it's not just like top down. It's like, okay, so you're starting out as a PA on set tomorrow. Like, how can you make sure that, or you're going on an audition, or you're starting as an extra tomorrow. Like, how can we make sure that young women and young men are empowered to take this on? So entry level. Brainstorm.
Well, become mentors to them. I have 2 young female actors that I am mentoring that are entering the industry, that I'm helping to, which reminds me, I need to text one back who texted me today. Anyway, she was asking me for my advice, and I'm happy to give it on where to study and so on, audition technique. But mentor them, talk to them about situations they might encounter and what's a good way to address if this happens, and especially focusing on their self-worth, and that it's not going to be the only agent who ever wants you. If they make you feel uncomfortable, get out of there. You know, that knowing your worth will put out the energy to bring in better people into your life too. I feel like it's a 2-way street. But mentoring people young.
So you're eager to learn, you're eager to be in that industry and be around these people and have that feeling of magic that we create literally every day. Like I always went in eager to learn, and like that's sort of how I would suggest going there, like because you're not there as a threat, you're looking to learn, you're young. You know.
And to off, I really work hard. I mean, this is true for anyone, but starting out, male, female, is be on time. Don't expect favors just because you are a woman. You know, if you're doing the job, you got to do it no matter what it is. Yes, I mean, to be aware of that, to not expect people to treat you better because you're a woman in some ways, you know, not to use your sexuality, not to use your being pretty, which is hard to do because if you're pretty, you know, you're used to getting a lot more than if, you know, you use it, but to be aware of that stuff, you know, so that you're not asking for some of the stuff that happens to women. Yeah.
I would say, like, know yourself, know your boundaries, and find someone, like, to flip what Tessa said, like, for us, we should be mentors, but when you're starting out, if you're starting out, find someone who you can trust, find somebody who is supporting you, who you can be yourself with, who you can ask questions of. Not everyone is going to be the right person to do that with. That's why you should know your boundaries, know yourself, and know that if something doesn't feel right, they're not the right person. Don't push it. Leave that situation. But I think it is very important to find someone to support you. That's definitely how I've got through. I've always been able to find someone to support wherever I was at that point in time. And yeah, we just have to hope that you are supported by good people.
Yeah, we have a community as women here in ourselves, and we should be supporting each other. So yeah.
And
yeah, I was just gonna jump in and say that, like, reach out to people, just like send an email. Somebody said to me recently, like, the art of the cold email or the cold call is like still very okay. And, you know, whenever someone reaches out to me, or I know any of my colleagues here, like, people are like, yes, I would love to help you. You need advice? Absolutely. How can I help? And it's just, I love the idea, Tessa, that you brought up of finding mentors and then just reversing that top down, being a mentor. I think that's super valuable. So, and knowing who you are and working hard and showing up on time. I think these are all like really, you know, wonderful things for entry level young women who are starting out. But let's like bump it up to like mid-level. So they're not entry level and now they have a little more pull. How can these women make a difference tomorrow when they show up?
Well, I mean, other than the mentoring, I don't know why this just popped into my head, but humor is really great. I mean, humor gets you a long way. To sort of just, you know, acknowledge or, you know, call somebody on something, but to do it in a way that's kind of funny. Not that you should have to do it that way, but rather than just go to, look, this has happened to me before, you're doing it, this sucks, you know, whatever. I think, yeah, to try to find some humor in a situation is always helpful.
That's a great tactic.
Mm-hmm.
For certain circumstances. Thank you. And also just the general thought that you have a right to take space. You have a right to have a voice, because overall our society doesn't teach women that. So just a reminder at that mid-level, I'm here and I can continue to climb, and I have something to give. I have a talent to share with the world, and so let the world make space for me to do that.
Love that. I was just on a call this morning with like tons of executives, and like, and there are a bunch of females on the call, like in post-production and the executives. So it's wonderful to see that. But yeah, like just vocalize what you need to vocalize. Don't be afraid.
Excellent. I think
and yeah, if anybody else has any ideas on how to, what we can do right now, and any ideas that you have, just feel free to reach out to us. We are here, 101 podcast.
I love that you both, Meredith and Kate, created this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's such an important conversation. So we really appreciate you guys. And thanks so much to Daryl Ferreira, our live streaming producer, for helping make sure everything goes nice and smoothly. And thanks to our listeners. We are so happy that you join us and listen to all of these amazing people that we talk to, and specifically our guests this evening, Diane, Lidia, and Tessa. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you.